Councilor Flynn. Yeah, so Councilor Flynn, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and members of the Ward 4 committee for inviting me today. I'm chair of the city neighborhood and services and district councilor for District 2, which includes most of the south end. Many of you know my role on the city council has been really to focus on the nuts and bolts of city government, quality of life issues, pedestrian safety, related issues, digital equity, public health, just to name a few. Honored to represent this district, honored to represent you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Pedestrian safety is probably the #1 issue I've focused on over the last several years. During the budget process, I fought for improved traffic safety infrastructure and grading funding for pedestrian safety measures, and we're getting an increase in $2 million in funding for FY22 for pedestrian safety in the Slow Streets program. I also filed a hearing order, and I've been working on this issue for several years. I've had a hearing on it before. Rodent control, not a sexy issue, certainly, but an important issue. I hear from a lot of residents throughout the district, throughout the city, who are concerned about the increase in rodent activities recently, but especially during the pandemic. But even prior to the pandemic, we know that trash removal and rodents have been a huge issue in this neighborhood. So that's something we have to continue working on. As I mentioned, the uptick in rodent activities caused by the pandemic. The CDC is one that environmental health and rodent control agencies are seeing aggressive and unusual rodent behavior due to restaurants and other food services closing down during pandemic. But also illegal dumping is also part of the problem. Trash is not properly disposed of, can attract rodents as well. This is an issue I've worked on with Michael Almond and many others. Filed a hearing order that I'll speak on tomorrow with Councilor Lydia Edwards on this issue. But those types of quality of life issues, including water and sewer, a lot of private alleys in the south end that we continue to work on, infrastructure improvements to our sidewalks and to our streets is also part of the process. Tree removal and urban canopy, we worked closely with South End residents and with Mothers Out Front on gas leaks, obviously harmful to our environment, but also harmful to our trees as well. We're seeing hundreds of trees throughout the year, throughout the city, die because of these gas leaks. We have literally thousands of gas leaks throughout the city that are ongoing. Certainly the minor gas leaks, but a minor gas leak certainly can turn into a major problem. So this is an issue I continue to focus on as chair of the City and Neighborhood Services. So I have a hearing order scheduled with Councilor Braden on this issue to discuss the current situation, how we can improve it, strengthening the notification and community process of potential tree removal is also part of it. Did you know that the way to notify someone that a tree is being removed in your neighborhood is a notice in the newspaper, weekly newspapers, and many of them aren't published anymore. Many people don't read the weekly newspapers, but that's the only requirement is that, but also putting a notice, a public notice, literally on the tree itself. So the city of Boston can certainly do a better job of public notification. So I'm trying to get something passed with my colleagues to have a better notification process, especially using social media. Digital equity has been a top issue I've focused on. I represent the largest number of residents living in public housing. I also represent a large immigrant community as well throughout South Boston, throughout the South End, and certainly Chinatown. I'll continue to work with my colleagues. I'm working closely with Councilor Bach to discuss strategies to ensure internet access and digital equity in the city of Boston. And maybe finally, I'll just highlight one more issue: HIV and AIDS, public health, ongoing increases of HIV/AIDS throughout the city, especially during the pandemic, disproportionately impacting communities of color at 65%. That's an issue I've focused on, I've studied, I've worked with the health centers in East Boston and South Boston, the South End, the Fenway as well. Working closely with Chief Marty Martinez at Health and Human Services for more funding, more outreach, more education, more prevention, public awareness as well. It's a critical issue, and public health is an issue I haven't focused on when I first started my job as a city councilor, but it's an issue I continue to read about and focus a lot of my time and energy on. The public health of our immigrants is certainly an issue. Chinatown has the highest rate of asthma of any neighborhood in Massachusetts. So I continue to focus on public health because it has a huge impact on our residents, but especially disproportionately impacting residents of color, but also our immigrant neighbors as well. Maybe I'll mention one more: CPA funding. I continue to work with neighborhood organizations, with the mayor's office, but educating neighborhood organizations, residents about the availability of CPA, how to complete the application, how to work with neighborhood organizations to get engaged in this money. Certainly it's taxpayer money from your real estate. 1% goes to CPA for historic preservation, for affordable housing, for our parks and open space. So I know it has a huge impact. And what I like about CPA, especially during these difficult times, it brings people together. And that's what we really need in our city. And CPA does that. It brings neighbors together. It brings residents together. It brings neighborhood organizations working together to improve quality of life for residents in our city, in the South End, in my district. So I just want to say thank you for Ward 4 for giving me the opportunity to be on tonight. Sophia Wang from who's my policy director, is also on. We attend every neighborhood meeting in the South End, every civic neighborhood association, and we respond immediately to quality of life issues. We return our phone calls, we return our emails. We're involved in improving the quality of life issues, especially during this difficult time. I want to say thank you to Sophia from my team, but also my team members as well. And I think I probably have the most diverse staff on the city council. I have 4 women of color that are immigrants, and we spend a lot of time working on immigrant rights, not just in my district, but throughout the city. Having said that, let me stop and answer questions or comments if that's appropriate at this time.
Great, thank you so much. Any questions that people have? And feel free to ask, let's see, Ben and Jane.
To unmute.
Well, thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. And I'm sure this is true in South Boston, but in the South End, the prices of homes are rising so quickly, and the property taxes are rising so quickly that particularly among the seniors, there is great fear that if they continue to rise, none of us will be able to afford to stay in the city. That we cannot afford to buy $4 million homes and can barely afford to pay tax. Many of us cannot afford to pay taxes. And if they go up, we can't. And what can the city do to lessen the burden and to make sure that middle class, not rich, but middle class people can stay in the city? And I'm sure this is something you see in South Boston as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Dr. Ben. It's good to see you. I actually had a hearing on this issue about 5 or 6 months ago. It's an important issue. It impacts almost every neighborhood in the city. Residents that might be living in, as you know, might be living in $1 million home that's valued at $1 million, doesn't mean they're wealthy, but they're paying a huge assessment on that $1 million home. Many working class families cannot afford it anymore. The assessments continue to go up, especially our seniors. They might be on fixed, well, they're on fixed income. They might have a retirement from one of the colleges. They might have a retirement from the city or the state, but they're not wealthy people. So I've offered a couple things. Certainly, one was passed and signed by Mayor Walsh. I worked on it with Councilor Edwards. This is more for low-income homeowners that were behind on their property taxes to get into a payment plan without interest, and to prevent foreclosures is one thing that I actually got passed with my colleague Lydia Edwards. The second piece of it, which impacts more middle-class families, as you mentioned, Jane, and I certainly agree. I think we need to see how, and what I would like to see is have a cap on property taxes for long-time residents, but also have a cap on property taxes for low-income residents, and the city of Boston be willing to work with people that can't afford it. In the way you can do that is the city also offers a volunteer program where you can have some of your property tax, a percentage of it waived if you do volunteer work in the community, which you are all doing anyway. It just has to be pre-approved by the city assessing department.
Is there not an income level for that? And my understanding is that our property taxes are $26,000. And we have friends whose property taxes are $36,000. And so a $1,500 credit is helpful, but will not really make a big difference.
Right. No, I understand. And then the other one is we are requesting assistance from the state government that allows the assessing department at the city of Boston to work closely with homeowners on these issues. So it's an ongoing discussion. It's an important discussion, but for a lot of residents, it's the major issue because people aren't wealthy, and the city continues to raise their value of their home. When a major condo goes up next to you, your property value goes up, which is great, but also it means the assessment of that property is going up as well. So we're working with the assessing department to see what else we can do to be more proactive in supporting seniors that own homes, but also supporting families that are also struggling as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for that question.
If I can just add to that, this is Margaret McKenna. Our neighbors across the river, resident exemption is 3 times ours or 4 times ours. I'm not exactly sure why the math is that way. Like I have a friend whose house is valued at less than mine, but her resident exemption is 4 times mine in Cambridge. Do you know why the history is that way? Why ours are $1,500 and hers is $8,000 in Cambridge? I mean, is there a philosophy about that? Cambridge values their residents more than Boston does?
Hey, Margaret, I don't know specifically the answer to that, but I do know Boston at the assessing department, we can't combine certain exemptions. If you get one exemption, it also means you can't get the second exemption or a third exemption, even though you might be eligible for it or qualify for it. So we had a working session several months ago. I want to have another working session again. And when we do, I want to include you and make sure we get more neighborhood participation. But we do propose to bring something to the state legislature. We'll certainly have to wait until the mayor's election's over, but we want to bring something to the state legislature to provide property relief to longtime residents, our seniors, persons with disabilities, families that are struggling. So all good questions, all good comments, and thank you, Margaret, and the Human Rights Commission, the tremendous work you're doing on it as well, Margaret. It's greatly appreciated, especially during this time. We continue to see a lot of anti-Asian discrimination. We see a lot of hate crimes. There was one recently, I think about a week ago, violence against the Asian community. So want to say thank you to the Human Rights Commission and to the residents of the city for being aware of it. But we have a lot of work to do in the city, not just on AAPI issues, but hate crimes against communities of color and immigrants as well. So thank you to the Human Rights Commission, Margaret.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Councilor Flynn?
I do.
Great.
Hi, Councilor Flynn.
Hi, Carol.
I was really interested in what you said about your work in the digital equity space. And a couple of questions. I'm wondering, how does Boston stack up against other cities across the country in terms of digital equity, if you know that? And also, in every single area that you discussed about your work, you humbly cited, coalitions that you're working with, and that's, really nice to hear. I'm wondering what kind of coalitions are required to bring a level of digital equity into all of Boston's neighborhoods. I mean, are we talking public-private partnerships? How do you go about solving that problem, which really became pressing during the COVID time?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. That's a very good point. We saw it, especially during COVID, as you mentioned. Even if two students from the same household were on the internet doing their homework on the computer that was provided by the public school system, only one would work. So it had a huge impact, devastating impact, really, on low-income families. And again, as I mentioned, I represent the most residents living in public housing of any district councilor. It had a huge impact in BHA. Very difficult to get digital, very difficult for a lot of students to log on to their assignments. But to answer your question is I think you are right. It's developing partnerships with the companies, with residents, with human rights organizations, civil rights organization. And who has been very effective on this issue is immigrant right groups. They really provided a lot of strong leadership on digital equity. Castle Square Tenants Association, they have an exceptional program there on computer assistance for seniors and for students. They do a tremendous job. Chinese Progressive Association does an exceptional job. I work with EBA on digital equity, but it takes everybody to get involved. Councilor Mejia Julia Mejia has been very good on digital equity, but it takes everybody's involvement, even if when you are comfortable yourself and in your own home and everything works for you. I know you guys think of others as well. That's the history of the South End, is always giving back. But a block away from my house is the Boston Housing Authority on West Broadway, but they don't have the same level of access that to equity, to digital equity, as my kids and my wife and my family. BHA also plays a critical role, the city of Boston. We increased the budget for Do It, the infrastructure, information and technology. So there's a lot of work we have to do, and it was just so noticeable during the pandemic that digital equity is really one of the top issues in the city.
Great, thank you. And any other questions? I think Annie, you said that you had a question.
I did. I was actually typing it, but this works. So my question is about the transportation around the city of Boston. And so, you know, we're a bike, bus, walk, driving city. And so my question is not about the for or against the bike lanes. It's just the fact that it seems like what we've been doing is haphazard, and it doesn't consider the safety of everything. Like bike lanes are like squeezed in where it makes sense. And like we have delivery trucks making delivery. And also like the signage within the transportation like isn't consistent. Like the bike lanes have been here for almost like what, more than 6 months around the public garden, but the sign is still the same. And so what I've been seeing is that folks get into car accidents because they're still thinking it's like a 2-lane, whatever, but now it's a 1 lane, and people like merging in and out because some of the driving lane is now a parking lane, et cetera. So where are we headed in terms of transportation within Boston, and also just making sure that when things are implemented, that all departments are also aware of that, as opposed to like, okay, this department did it, but then no other department know that it happened.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think it's about coordinating and communication of city services, and the other key part of it is educating the public on pedestrian safety related issues. I think we need to do a better job of public awareness, public education on exactly what the rules of the road are. And I don't mean to be, kind of a wise guy, but I think a lot of residents don't know what the rules of the road are for pedestrians, for drivers, and it's dangerous. Certainly going 25 miles an hour down a small street in the South End of Bay Village, that's excessive speed. I want to see the speed limit reduced to 20 miles an hour at least. I also want to see strict enforcement of the current speeding laws. I want us to do more aggressive ticketing for moving violations in the city. We have so many schools in this neighborhood, and we see so many little kids, students walking to school. We see a lot of seniors and persons with disabilities, and you could be in the sidewalk crossing the street, and the car will have no regard for you at all and just continue driving as if you're not there. So I hear about it every day from seniors, especially from my parents who are in their 80s, and when they're crossing the street in the crosswalk, a car will speed right by them. So I take these issues seriously. I probably talk to the transportation department at least once a day. I'm on top of them all day long. I have zero tolerance for people speeding and for feeling like they have the ability to park wherever they want and drive recklessly. So I'm a stickler for that. And I focus on that all the time on the city council, and I'm going to continue focusing on pedestrian safety. The Slow Streets program, it's almost neighbors competing against neighbors in a competitive process, but the city itself is unsafe for many. And so that was one of the reasons I was able to secure additional funding in the city budget, but it's not enough. I think we also need significant money from the federal government that was recently provided to be used for pedestrian safety, infrastructure improvements, road safety, road diets, making sure our pedestrians are safe, our cyclists are safe, and our streets are walkable, and our sidewalks are walkable too, including for persons with disabilities. I hope that information is helpful, Amy.
Councilor, Councilor Flynn, this is Marlene. Can you hear me?
I hear you, Marlene. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, and thank you for your really wonderful service to the community, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to cycle back to the property taxes, and the question I think Margaret McKenna asked about the exemption in Cambridge. Cambridge as a city has so much money coming in due to big pharma and the biotech industry. It is just unbelievable what is happening there. The per pupil expenditure, same way, compared to Boston, it's so much higher. But with respect to the Boston property taxes, I mean, it is true that when the assessments go up, your taxes go up. But why should that be the case? Because what determines your taxes is not your reevaluation necessarily, but the tax rate. So if the tax rate does not adjust to, to the increased valuation, then of course, there will be more money for Boston and for its budget. But the question is, how much of the budget is needed, and should that be an automatic increase every time property taxes rise? So who sets the tax rate, and do you as a councillor have a voice in that?
Yeah, we as a council formally vote every year to vote for certain provisions in the taxes that allow people for deductions. For these deductions, we have to vote on it. I think it's once a year, and it usually comes up in November. So residents can have certain deductions from the assessment department. That's our formal role. But we do work closely with the assessing department when someone's value of their property is excessive. We work with the assessing to at least arrange a one-on-one meeting to describe why the value of the property went up excessively. So I do have a lot of those types of meetings with residents in the assessing department. But we're also trying to, as I mentioned earlier, we have to get certain relief from the state government that we're hoping to work on now.
But do councillors like yourself also have a say in the tax rate, which determines your tax bill? So it's property taxes times, the tax rate. So the tax rate is 10, and it was 10 last, say it's 10, just taking a number. If it was 10 last year and your property taxes go up, should it then should the tax rate then remain 10, or should it be 9?
Yeah, Marlene, that's set by the state, and we don't have a say in that.
You have no say in the tax rate that we pay for our property taxes.
No.
That's amazing. That should change. That's not right.
Well, there's a lot of provisions, and the city of Boston is looking at the charter, and there's a lot of provisions in our charter and in state law that puts obstacles in the way of city government to do certain things. We need permission from the state government, the home rule petition, to get a lot of things done in our city, which is frustrating to us but you know, we're looking at the charter of the city. Lydia Edwards is taking the lead on it and looking at it to see what else that we can do to make it easier for Boston to incorporate changes without going to the state for relief or for assistance.
Right. Well, I just want to make one more comment that if the state, you know, if the state sets the tax rate, then the Bostonians don't have to ask the state for relief because we're giving it to ourselves, except we have to pay for it ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
thank you very much. That was very, very illuminating, depressingly so.
And then I'll go to Nina, you had a question. Ben and Jane have a question. I'll let you ask both of your questions, hand it over to Councilor Flynn to answer, and then bring up Councilor Bach.
Well, now I have like 3 things. So now I'm trying to figure out which thing I want to talk about. But with the real estate, my understanding is that part of the issue is that developers keep flipping things. So the price keeps going up and up and up. And then of course, with that comes the taxes, because once everything is more expensive, the taxes get raised about 6 months behind that. I know at one point there was some noise about penalizing flippers. You know, if you buy something and sell it within 6 months or something, you get penalized for that. I don't know if that ever went anywhere.
Yeah, you're right, Nina. I supported that. It was actually proposed by Councilor Edwards and Councilor Janey, Mayor Janey, and I believe it was basically called like a flipping tax, and if you turned around and sold your property within 1 year of buying it, and you made a huge significant profit, there would be an additional penalty on what you pay to the city. So that was from Councilor Edwards and Mayor Janey. But the structural changes that we need to make, we would have to do it through the home rule petition, but working closely with state legislators. You know, structural changes, changing existing exemptions, doubling exemptions would be critical. Increase the income limit, creating new exemptions for long-term, as I mentioned, long-term homeowners. So there's a whole bunch of issues we have that we addressed in the working session, but we're trying to come up with a plan that we can bring to the mayor at the appropriate time that would provide needed relief to long-time homeowners in the city. I agree with everybody that the prices, the tax rate is huge, is high. People can't afford to live in the city, and some people think that the basic city services are declining for a lot of residents. So you know, you're paying a huge property tax, but many people feel like they don't get quality basic city services. And that's really the reason I wanted to focus on basic city services, is because it's the nuts and bolts of city government. And if your water and sewer doesn't work for you, or if rodent control is an issue, or your streets are unsafe, you know what the next step is probably to leave the city. And I don't want that to happen. And I know no one wants to leave the city, but those are difficult decisions. And that's why I'm trying to do my best on basic city services, and while working on this tax issue as well.
Yeah, I don't know. Have I used up my question here already?
But you can hold any other questions, and Ben and Jane, I'll keep up your questions, since I know Councilor Bach has another meeting after this. I know Councilor Flynn has a meeting to get to as well. I'm gonna kind of bring up Councilor Bach, but Councilor Flynn, if you could put your contact information into the chat, or if Sophia is here, can do that, because if anybody has follow-up information, I know your staff is always very helpful. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's good to be with everybody. Good to be with my friends from Ward 4 on the South End. And one of my long-term goals is, talking to my friend Marlene, but I'd love to have a state-of-the-art, beautiful, new South End library. And I'm gonna be committed to that and dedicated to that. The South End certainly deserves it, but I'm just so proud of the Friends of the South End Library as well. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Jonathan, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And let me bring up Councilor Bach.
Hello, Jonathan.
Hey,
Glad to,
long time no see.
yes, exactly. Had the pleasure of meeting with a subcommittee of this committee a few hours ago. So it's nice to see a few of you again.
So as I noted, give you a few minutes, talk about what you've been up to on the council, any kind of interesting initiative stuff, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Sure, great. So yeah, and I'll try to keep it brief because I know Ward 4 folks are folks with good questions. So we'll try to get to those as soon as possible. So yeah, Kenzie, I think I know most of the people on this call, but represent District 8. So in Ward 4, that's sort of the Fenway part of the ward. I also represent from Mission Hill through to the West End. And yeah, I guess, you know, for the last few months was heavily focused on the city budget. And so that passed on June 30th. And now I'm kind of back working on other policy fronts, but those things kind of intertwine. So I'll talk about a few of the things that we kind of made down payments on in this year's budget that I'm hopeful are going to be areas that we're able to extend. Frankly, whomever is elected mayor of Boston, I think that, you know, when I talk to folks around the city and certainly around the district, I think there's a pretty broad sense that although there's a very active election going on and we're choosing between a whole suite of people, that the challenges that this person is going to need to face and that the council is going to need to partner with the next mayor on are pretty consistent across the board. So I think folks will remember when I ran 2 years ago, it was very much first and foremost on affordable housing. And that remains, I think, one of the lead challenges of the city of Boston. I always say that, you know, housing is a particular kind of keystone issue because if you make everything else about the city better, but you lose the diversity of people who live in the city, then, you know, who have you made the city better for, right? Like people being able to be anchored in place here is so essential. So, you know, I think we've done a bunch of exciting things like on the council and in this year's budget. One thing I'm really excited about is we already last year did a big expansion of the city's first-time home buyer program. This year, actually, the city's invested for the first time in a first-generation home buyer program to complement the first-time one we have. And the thing about first-generation home buying is that it tends to be particularly effectively targeted at helping to close the racial wealth gap, right? Because as we all know, there's this history of white families being able to get into the home ownership world, especially with the GI Bill and everything in the 50s, and that really not being available to families of color. And so first generation home ownership is like a really exciting kind of new area. And honestly, Boston's sort of piloting it as an approach in the whole country. So that was a big thing in this year's budget. I would really like to see us build new public housing units in the city again. The city of Boston, every city in the country is capped in how many federal public housing units it's allowed to have that the federal government will support. Those caps were put in 1999 and they're called Faircloth limits. But as it happened, Boston actually got rid of a bunch of our units after that cap was set. We did redevelopment and we made a lot of developments. You know, we gave people nicer buildings, but we reduced the total number of units. And because of that, unlike most cities that are at their cap, we're actually 2,500 units below our cap. So when we talk about like deeply affordable housing and how do we house, you know, the folks who are at 30% of area median income and less, like a federal program that provides really safe, you know, rental support that's going to go up and down depending on, you know, if you fall out of work or if you have a health experience like the pandemic, is really the gold standard in terms of providing people with housing stability. And the nice thing is that now there are ways to use that subsidy to support units that could be mixed into mixed income buildings. They could be the ones we build above libraries. Like we've got a conversation going about building units above the West End Library at the other end of my district. And it's a thing where if the city can come up with the upfront capital to help create these units, then the federal government's actually obliged to provide us with the ongoing operating resources. And so you know, when you think about a wait list of 50,000 families for public housing, which is what we have right now in Boston, which is wild. 2,500, well, it doesn't get us there. It's about the biggest step we could kind of imagine taking. So so we've got some study work that's being funded through this budget around kind of preparing for that. It's also, as we talk about a federal housing as infrastructure kind of push, there's an opportunity for Boston to sort of get ready to be one of the places that, if there is a bunch of housing money in the infrastructure bill, is sort of ready to receive it and has plans and has sort of shovel-ready projects. Because a lot of times when people talk about shovel-ready projects, they're not talking about housing because it's just too complicated, and the permitting and we make it very complicated in the city. Really pushing to kind of get all the wheels turning on that, because I think it could be a really big initiative. And it's about shifting to a more public city, right, where we own more social housing again. So that's a big focus of mine. We actually put in the budget, there was a big supplemental appropriation passed by the council, you may have seen, sort of as a way of getting to yes on the budget, which people didn't feel was necessarily addressing all of our urgent priorities in the city. So we've actually put $20 million more in the acquisition opportunity program, which is a program that's focused on, let's say there's kind of what they call like a Class C apartment building. It's a kind of old apartment stock, and it's sort of naturally not at the top of the market right now, but then the owner's going to sell it. And the risk is, well, some private equity place is going to buy it, clear out the tenants, you know, jazz it up, and then rent it at the top of the market. The goal with AOP is basically for the city to be able to step in and support nonprofit organizations, whether it's a land trust or a CDC or whatever, to buy the building instead, and then kind of take it out of the speculative market and attach permanent affordability restrictions. So it's designed as a, you know, as a program that really, like, you know, takes some of that housing that's often fully occupied and housing our moderate income, low income neighbors, and make it something that, you know, that people can rely on. And so I'm pretty excited. Like, we put a bunch of money into that because we are worried about the kind of roiling in the real estate market, both commercial and residential right now, and losing some of those opportunities. And we also did a new tranche of money for land trust specifically, really trying again to kind of take that speculation piece out by giving public and community control over land. So I think there's some pretty exciting stuff. We've also got a new co-op. There's a bunch of co-ops in the Fenway. I know some of you on this are in this. We've got the first ever city-backed cooperative share loan revolving fund, which basically is for dealing with a problem where to buy into a cooperative should be much more affordable for folks than often, you know, getting a mortgage on a full house yourself. That's the whole idea, and it's part of how you democratize wealth holding. Except that because a lot of banks don't really know what a cooperative share loan is, they won't lend to you for it. And so you can find yourself in a weird position where you can get a mortgage, but you can't get a share loan for a much smaller thing. And there's just not enough of that financial product. And so this is like a revolving fund to basically make it easier for people from, you know, people who don't have a big nest egg built up to be able to access co-ops. And we're also going to have co-op training as part of the first time homeowner class in Boston too, so that people are exposed to it as an option and a model. Like I said, it's been really successful in the Fenway. So yeah, so I think, you know, everything that we're doing in the city kind of needs ramping up. And it's a big place where I think we want to spend federal dollars, where we want to get commitments from the new mayor, whoever they are, to really grow. But what I feel great about is I feel like we kind of have at a seed level a lot of the types of programs that you would want to really change the game here. And like, we made some big steps towards that also on June 30. I think we're all going to be working on the land trust new acquisition model, but there's some exciting stuff. So, and I've been very focused on that and on the affirmatively furthering fair housing zoning amendment that we passed late last year. Councilor Edwards and I worked intensively on that. And now we're very much in the throes of making sure that implementation at the BPDA kind of goes through in a way that's like maximally effective and helps get us real, like, you know, integrated diverse communities and prevent displacement. So that's a whole suite of housing things that definitely has kind of, as I said, when I ran, been my number one focus on the council. Another major focus though has been on the conservation core green jobs front. So we've had a couple of good working sessions looking at what would a city level conservation corps, climate corps, whatever you want to call it, look like. You've heard probably a lot about it at the federal level, but we really feel like we can do a local model here. And like, it's so essential both to accelerate the work we're doing on, on limiting our carbon emissions, on mitigation for climate impacts, and because we need to hit these targets and because we need to protect the city. But also, if we're going to grow these industries in order to do this work in our own city, we should be growing them in ways that employ local Bostonians, right? And create jobs for Black and Brown youth that are turned into proper pipelines. And so that was something my office has really pushed throughout the past year. And we got $1 million of green jobs money in the budget. And then in the back and forth between the council and the mayor, we actually expanded that by another 3 million. So we've got 4 million, which really gives you enough to start something meaningful this year. So I'm pretty excited about that. I was talking with Chief White Hammond about it yesterday. And I think we have an opportunity to, again, be a real model place on that. And then I guess a third thing that's sort of got a seed in the budget that I think we need to really drill down on as we think about the federal funds, I suspect relates to something that Councilor Flynn talked about. I only caught the tail end of Councilor Flynn's comments, but based on the chat, I suspect we might have talked about digital equity and access and municipal broadband. And, we actually put $300,000 in this year's budget to do a serious study of what municipal broadband in Boston would cost us to build out and like what that would look like. Because, there's been this long-term sense of, it would be expensive for the city to build out its broadband network. I mean, the city has actually a fiber network that connects a bunch of city buildings currently, including public housing, including schools, fire, like City Hall. So, we've got something, but we haven't looked seriously at building it out in a way that would, compete on the public side with what the private side internet providers do. But the reality is that the US is kind of trapped in this place where those providers provide crappy service and charge you too much for it, but they're not incentivized. Like for them, it's like, why would you spend tons of money making the service way better when they're already charging you an arm and a leg for it because they're the only one or one of the two that gets to you? And so it's like, and they can't charge you that much more just because of your budget, right? And so because of that, we're actually like stuck in this doldrums where other countries are jumping way ahead of us in terms of the ubiquity of like high quality fiber access. And we saw in the pandemic that it's just not acceptable. Like people can't join a meeting like this from a civic perspective. Lots of our city meetings have moved online. It was a huge issue for school children, our families who were trying to work and have kids all on the same thing at the same time. It was crazy. And that's the direction the world is going. And the way I think about it, and I wouldn't say I've convinced everybody on this yet. Like there's a bunch of people who just think, look, there's a bunch of companies. We've actually got decently dense coverage in Boston compared to other cities. Like, let them figure it out. My instinct is it's going to turn out to be like sewers or like railroads. Both railroads and sewers started out as something that private companies would build, and they would, and you would be paying a private company to ride on the railroad or to hook up to their sewer. And actually a few South End neighbors, including I think Ward 4 people, have some of the few remaining private sewers that exist in the city of Boston, and they're a disaster because the reality is like certain things are meant to operate as a utility and just kind of operate better as what a natural kind of monopoly. And I think that we're going to find over our lifetimes that like we just have to think of the internet that way. In a weird way, we are already thinking the internet that way, but we are not regulating it as a utility, and we're not providing it to people as like an essential thing. And so to me, it's more and more like sort of the water system that people need to not be cut off from. That's it's probably a couple of $1 billion. So that's like a huge capital expense. And the first step is really getting our arms around what does that look like. And I will say, if we ever actually move towards really doing it after doing this study, the cable company lobbyists will come out of the woodwork. but to me, it's a really important, like, I always think you should build public infrastructure thinking about how it's going to be used, not for the next 30 years, which is often the timeline people are thinking in theory, but for the next 50 to 100 years, which is the timeline that we actually use municipal infrastructure for in practice. And frankly, in Boston, we use a heck of a lot of things that have been around for longer than 100 years. And so this feels like a moment where with the pandemic, people have seen how much we rely on it. And I think with all those things, like it's the same with housing. I think if you didn't think housing was part of healthcare before the pandemic, you sure as heck should see that now. So trying to kind of capitalize on this moment that's been so hard in so many ways to make some real kind of structural progress on this sort of public assets for public good front is a big part of my focus. So that, I think, is probably enough of a spiel from me. And now, Jonathan, I'd be happy to.
Yes. So I know I had Ben and Jane hold a question from Flynn, so I'm gonna go to their question first, and then go to Nina, and then go to Ryan. So Ben and Jane.
Oh, hi. It has to do with Councilor Flynn's discussion about home rule and charter. What would it take for us to expand voting capacity by continuing mail-in voting, expanding the voting process, and then even moving the voting to the congressional election cycle so we can get more people engaged in voting? Big worry, and that is that not a lot of people are going to turn out for the preliminary election.
So I would say two separate things. So on the mail-in voting front, I mean, obviously the legislature has done another temporary extension. We would need state law on the mail-in voting front, but I personally think we should just be making that permanent. I mean, I think it's another one of these things. We've seen that it works for people, and I think pretty much the entire Boston City Council and sort of city apparatus is in favor of that. And it's just a question of getting the state to do it. And although we are going to send these home rule petitions from Councilor Arroyo's office up to I fully expect us to pass those on Wednesday and send them up to the State House. But I'm not super optimistic that the State House will let Boston have more permissive and supportive voting rules than the rest of the state, for the sad reason that they'll worry that our, diverse urban population will then outvote them in statewide elections. So I suspect that whatever opening up we're going to get on a permanent basis on that front, we're going to need to get over the across the whole state. But it's definitely worth fighting for. And I think it's going to be crazy if they try to actually take it away from people. So my hope, Ben, is we'll succeed there. On the having city elections align with state and federal elections question, that would take a charter change. The city elections are currently, they're set on the 4 and the 2 year cycles, but they're set went like on these odd years, right? So we would have to shift them over, and you'd have to pick a mayor to give either a 3 year or a 5 year term to, right? To switch the cycle over. I mean, I'll say that I personally am for that. I think we know that a cross section of the city votes in the municipals. That doesn't include the full breadth of the city that votes at the higher levels. I'm sure there are people who would argue that, I mean, well, I'll say this. I think probably the downside piece would be when I was working on the Community Preservation Act question, it was the 2016 election, and your chances of buying any TV time for a community ballot question when there's a real presidential going in New Hampshire's in our media market are like none, right? So it does create this dynamic where with the local races, you have to figure out like how you're going to compete with the others for attention. And I don't think we should downplay that fact. But at the same time, in the case of the Community Preservation Act, it was still better for us to have, a more complete electorate that included a lot more renters and people who experience the need for affordable housing, right? So, I think that, at least on that, it came out in the wash. But I would be for it. It would take a charter. It would take charter reform, and there's 2 ways to do charter reform. You can do kind of limited changes, which is like what the ballot question that's going to be on will be. Or you can do a sort of whole charter reform kind of like convention committee, which is a much bigger effort that the city would have to kick off.
So I'm gonna go to Nina, Ryan, and then Lisa.
Hi. I'm wondering, I know a lot of the things that happen in the city take money, need capital. And I've done some research into parking and parking fees, and I know that there's like a ton of money that Boston is leaving on the table from not charging even a minimal amount for parking permits. I'm wondering if you have any sense of why that's happening and what it would take to change it. For instance, I mean, people are paying $20 to go to a movie right now, and there are other. What am I trying to say? I know the city doesn't know how many parking spaces it has, and I know it doesn't limit its permits, so it's like set up for people to be frustrated. There's a guy in the South End who has 11 cars that he parks for free in public property on the streets, and I can't put my bike there, I can't put my sofa there. So I'm wondering if you have any insights into what's going on there and why they would want to not collect that kind of money for $25 for permits.
It's I mean, it's political will. It's the electorate is perceived to be against charging people. People generally, elected officials are aware that people do not like receiving a thing for free and then being told that they have to pay for it. That is a basic, in fairness, that is a basic human psychological principle, right? Like no matter what we think about car storage and whatever, that's just like, and so I think that's honestly been the political constraint. I mean, I think that it would make a lot of sense to charge, a fee, even if it were relatively minimal for the first car, right? And it certainly puts us out of the norm of other cities that we don't. And I also think that just in general, right, like the city has to, in all of its planning, move towards a less car dependent reality. There's no way we meet either our climate goals or frankly our housing goals if we don't do that. And my joke with folks, but I kind of mean it, is I'm like, I live in the future and you're welcome anytime. District 8 is dense housing that where a lot of people who don't have cars, and far from being a hellscape, everyone wants to live here, right? So it's sort of like, if we're going to do, we are going to have to make more of the city look like our part of the city to house people in an eco-friendly and frankly community-friendly kind of way, right? So I think, and but I will say that, I mean, I have been pushing at the council even a move just to remove parking minimum requirements and zoning for all affordable developments, which really is a lot about taking away a way for specious lawsuits and efforts to block those developments at the ZBA from operating. And even there, I would say we've encountered a lot of resistance to getting rid of parking minimums. And the fact is you can still build parking. It's just a question of whether it's required by zoning. So I guess I would just say, Nina, I agree with you. I think we are we haven't gotten there yet collectively. I hope it will be a continuing part of the conversation in the mayor and council races, and that maybe we could come out of this cycle with a somewhat new consensus on that front.
Right. You're right. People don't like paying for something that they're getting for free. And the places that have changed it have done it by, well, there are a lot of ways to do it. We don't have to get into it now, but they would feel like they were getting something for paying it. That would be the trick to change it. Or for people to know, right, what do they say, $60,000 to build a parking space in a building? That's how much it costs, which is why things aren't affordable. I mean, it's just crazy in a dense urban area. All right, well, yes, I'd be all for that.
Good question.
If you can make any movement.
Yeah, and shout out to Kenzie, Councilor Bach, for the ordinance that you filed with Councilor O'Malley about related to parking minimums recently. Ryan and then Lisa.
Yay.
Hi, Councilor. Thanks for joining us. I actually had written down part of my question, and the first part of it was thanking you for your affordable housing work and for your minimum parking affordable housing efforts. So it tied right into what was just discussed. But on top of that, I think you already answered a little bit your beliefs on just lowering overall parking requirements for developments. I mean, right now it's just off the border of Ward 4, but it's in your district. In the Fenway, they're doing all the developments along Brookline and basically adding close to 2,000 spots just in those developments. And the view is, well, we're meeting the city's requirements, and in a lot of cases, even meeting the city's minimum requirements. We're not allowed to go below this as developers. Now, the whole process is going around the official zoning laws. So I'm sure they could ask for lower parking if they wanted to. But is there, or are there initiatives now to lower those parking requirements kind of citywide? And then my second question would be related to your thoughts on the city's ability or the city council's ability to push for further movement along the lines of rent stabilization, rent control, however it should be framed.
Yeah, so on the parking minimums front, I mean, first of all, thank you, Ryan, for your service on the CAC over there on Brookline Ave. And I think that you guys are doing just the right thing in pushing back on that number. I mean, what I would say is we have not permitted that number of new spaces yet. And in my mind, we shouldn't be doing it. So, you know, I think we've got to hold the line. And I think in Fenway, we have the advantage that we actually have a bunch of residents who know that you don't need that kind of car density to live in our neighborhoods. And so I think we got to keep holding the line on that. And frankly, like there's a lot of questions attached to the city building a bunch more lab capacity. I think like it's great to diversify the city's economy and it could be a real source of economic strength for Boston, but it's got to come with real jobs for Bostonians. And it can't just be for people to drive in from the suburbs, right? And I think that's a piece of what the car counts are coming from. And so I think that's a big thing that we're in this moment, right, of this like sudden explosion of lab interest in Boston. And if we on the public side don't use that moment to figure out how that actually works for the city of Boston and drive shared prosperity instead of inequality, like we've totally missed the moment, right? So that's got to be a real key focus. And then with changing parking minimums in general, I mean, I think we've got to, obviously we have to first have this conversation about, you know, even affordable building. I mean, you know, I think we got to move the conversation on that. And all it's going to take is all of us really talking about the climate impacts, about what the reality of sort of dense, walkable, livable housing communities look like. And I think it's just got to be a focus of continued advocacy. It does help if that's something you believe in, for it to be something that your elected representatives to hear about, because I will say that the phone calls tend towards people who are upset about the possibility of us moving away from parking. So I would just keep that in mind. If it's something you care about advocating for, it's important. And then on the rent stabilization front, well, the council we just passed this home rule, or I guess, are we voting on it this Wednesday? I guess that's right. We haven't passed it yet, but I fully expect us tomorrow to pass a home rule that we're setting up. Again, this is in that category of things we have to ask the state for permission for, to help extend the oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? So we have expiring use properties all over the city, which are these affordable housing developments that the state made affordable for 40 years. And then there's this window of opportunity where the owners can take them market. And it's hugely displacing to a bunch of communities in the city. And so we're basically trying to make it so it's like, okay, look, if this housing was set up with government funds and it's like governmentally involved housing and it's coming to one of these expirations, like basically like there has to be a requirement for them to really deal in good faith on the public side and extend these contracts, because it's been really destructive. We're losing a whole elder Russian speaking community in Babcock Towers and Councilor Braden's district, and just like a lot of really bad stuff. So that's about governmentally involved housing. So it's not the whole thing, right? But it's something that we're trying to see if the State House will let us move on. And then for a broader rent stabilization thing, it would continue to need State House action frustratingly for all of us. We've been looking for creative things around the edges. We also passed a new condo conversion ordinance last year that was designed to basically make flipping a lot harder, and like flipping it from rental to condos, right, and clearing out buildings a lot harder. And we have found that if you just increase the friction of those things, you just make them harder to do, a certain number of owners just can't be bothered. And so it's amazing how many people you can keep by just increasing that friction a little bit. So we're going to keep working on ways to do it, but for a real holistic rent stabilization thing, because of that ballot question from 93 or 94, I guess it was, we're still kind of like stuck with the state level action need.
So Lisa, ask your question, and then Amelia, ask your question, and I'll let Councilor Bach answer both of them. And then I know because Ward 5 is that you have a busy meeting, I'll let you get off to that.
Hi, I have a question that is on a state level, but I'm still kind of hoping to get your thoughts. There is a bill called H225, and it is to focus on the use of adversives in the state of Massachusetts, which they're actually legal here. They're not legal anywhere else in the country. And the FDA put a ban on them. It got overturned on a technicality. But luckily, this bill that I just mentioned addresses it. It also, deals with some other things that are inappropriate that happen to kids and adults. And, it's a bill that sort of helps a lot of problems with people being treated inhumanely, including people getting electric shock treatments, essentially, that are of a very high voltage. So my question is, would you be willing to support this bill? Because I'm doing advocacy on it, and I'd love to be able to say, this politician supports it, this politician supports it.
And then I think that'll be quick. If you want to answer that, I think that might be
sure. I would just say, so I followed Lisa but only as a reader of the paper, the shock therapy thing. It's in Canton, right?
Correct.
Certainly I would say like all of my moral instincts are in agreement with you on that one. So I can't pretend I've read the bill, but I would definitely be inclined to support that. Yeah.
Great. And then Amelia, if you want to ask your question.
Sure. Thanks for being here, Councilor Bach. One of the things that came out of the police reform bill discussion was the need to reallocate funds so that more social workers and mental health workers could respond to calls instead of the police. And so I'm wondering if there will be any movement or implementation of that this year.
Yes. So there is $1.75 million in the budget for a pilot to basically like try to figure out alternative 911 response for mental health calls specifically. And we're expecting, so the department, HHS has been running point on kind of like thinking through what this could look like design wise. My office, I actually had a fellow spend the spring working on looking at comparing different cities that have done this and sort of what models folks have used. And so we shared a lot of that research with HHS. And then also as they started designing their program, actually one of the things I said to them in May was I said, you guys are having some interagency meeting and we're all supposed to wait in here in July, but I think there's like a lot of community members who have thought a lot about this, who would like to share with you, their perspective. And I really hope that's not going to come as a sort of comment period after you've made all your decisions, right? So, because it's so important, I think, for people to feel like, the back and forth about the whole like alternative policing thing has been, well, what comes next? What's the alternative system, right? And so I think like setting up an alternative system at a pilot level is great, but you want that to be the type of system that's going to be able to grow to take more and more capacity. And that means that like, having community input in the design at the beginning is really important. So they did end up having a bunch of listening sessions with community groups in June, and then they've opened that up to some more public sessions this July. And so I'm expecting them to come out with recommendations soon based on those. And my sense is that when they were sort of interagency talking about it, they were going in kind of more of a co-response model. One of the things I said to them was, I really get the sense that the folks who want this, like they want it because we want non-police response to mental health calls, right? And so it's like, yes, we have to identify the type of calls correctly, but when we do that, like, how do we set up a program that really is an alternative from the beginning? So I do think a lot of the community feedback they've gotten over the last 2 months has also pushed in that direction. And so I'm hopeful that at a minimum, a substantial portion of what the pilot's doing is going to be in that category. They may also bulk up the sort of co-response stuff that they're doing through BEST. And, if we're doing both, there can be a world where that makes sense. But I think it's really important to have the non-police response. So.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, who represents part of our ward, has a bill in the legislature about being able to create kind of a funding stream from the state for such programs on the local level. I can send out stuff about that. Testified for it last week. Lisa, is that a follow-up question or a hand still up?
Oh, sorry. I'll put down my hand.
Okay, no worries. But since I know you do have to get to Ward 5's meeting tonight, I want to say, can we have a round of thanks for Councilor Bach? I know that you put in your contact information in the chat before.
Yes, please be in touch, and great to see you all. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, bye.